Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take on these huge, intimidating stacks of corporate research, geopolitical analysis, and we boil them all down.
Right, down to the essential, sometimes surprising and often controversial nuggets. You need to be, truly well-informed.
And today, we are strapping ourselves into the cab of, well, the largest manufacturer of construction equipment on Earth, Caterpillar Inc.
It is so easy to see that yellow iron, the bulldozers, the big haul trucks, and just assume you know the company.
But that's just scratching the surface.
Oh, absolutely. What we're diving into is a $64.8 billion global entity. It's not just digging earth. It is deeply involved in finance, in energy production, logistics, and some really high-stakes international strategy.
So our mission today is to give you a shortcut. We want to take you through nearly a century of incredible history.
And help you understand the sheer, almost overwhelming scale of their business.
And then, crucially, we have to confront the really intense stuff. The labor disputes, the regulatory failures, and these profound ethical flashpoints that seem to follow the yellow giant wherever it operates.
It's really a story about how a single engineering innovation can lead to massive global power and, the very complex responsibilities that come with that power.
And we really need to set the scale immediately, just so you know what we're dealing with here.
Let's do a quick snapshot.
Yeah.
For 2024, Caterpillar reported $64.8 billion in revenue.
$64 billion.
And they generated a net income of $10.8 billion. They've got 112,900 employees all over the world.
And maybe the biggest sign of just how fundamental they are to the American industrial landscape
is that Caterpillar stock is a component of the Dow Jones Industrial Average.
The Dow. That's exclusive company.
It is. This is a company that is foundational to global infrastructure, full stop.
That context is vital. So we've structured this deep dive pretty clearly. First, we're going way back to the muddy delta fields of California to witness that single moment of inspiration that solved a huge engineering problem and basically started it all.
Then we'll trace the path, which was pretty chaotic, from a bitter local rivalry to the massive global conglomerate it is today.
And then we're going to dedicate a substantial amount of time to unpacking their corporate evolution through strategic buying and selling.
And after that, we dive headfirst into the controversies. The intense battles with the unions, the government scrutiny over taxes and emissions, and, of course, the deep ethical questions around how their products are used around the world.
All right, let's unpack this journey.
Okay, let's start exactly where the whole industry began, with a whole lot of mud.
The history of Caterpillar is, at its heart, a really beautiful, simple story. It's about solving a single, unavoidable physics problem.
Right.
The founder, Benjamin Holt, and his company in the 1890s in California, they had all the horsepower they needed from their steam tractors, but they just couldn't apply that power to the ground.
And the location is key here. It was the San Joaquin Valley Delta. The farmland was famously fertile, but it was also incredibly soggy, just mud.
So it's a problem of surface area and pressure.
Exactly. These steam tractors were giants. Sometimes weighing 1,000 pounds per horsepower.
Wow.
So imagine all that concentrated weight being applied directly to soft, muddy delta land. You hit the throttle, and instead of moving forward, you just start sinking.
And before they had the big breakthrough, Holt tried solving this with just sheer, unsustainable size. It's almost comical looking back at how big these failed solutions were.
Oh, they were truly desperate. They were trying to defy the physics of ground pressure with just geometry.
So what did they do?
They tried increasing the size of the wheels until they were just utterly massive, like 7.5 feet tall and 6 feet wide.
7.5 feet tall.
Mm-hmm. And that gave them these enormous contact patches, but it also meant the resulting tractor was a monstrous 46 feet wide overall.
46 feet. Can you even imagine trying to operate and maintain a machine that wide in a field? It sounds less like a piece of equipment and more like a poorly designed cruise ship trying to navigate a farm.
That's a pretty good analogy. The sources say they were complicated, prohibitively expensive, and just about impossible to maintain or steer effectively.
So they were at a dead end.
Completely. Holt even considered this insane idea of laying temporary plank roads ahead of the machine as it moved.
But the cost and the time.
Exactly. The cost and the interference with farming just made it totally impractical. They needed something else. They needed a self-laying, continuous road.
So here is where the ingenious solution finally arrived. Holt had this realization out. Why not take those temporary planks, the ones they couldn't afford to lay down in advance, and just wrap them around the mechanism?
That was it. That was the flash of inspiration that changed industrial history.
And it led directly to the continuous track system.
It did. And we have a specific date. It was Thanksgiving Day, November 24th, 1904. Holt took his 40-horsepower steamer, which is designated number 77, and he replaced its massive wheels with wooden tracks that were bolted to chains.
Man, the tests.
It was on the infamously soggy Roberts Island, and it worked flawlessly.
Just like that.
Just like that. The weight was instantly distributed across a much larger surface area, and that allowed the machine to basically float over the mud instead of sinking into it.
And that single successful test is the technological foundation that all modern heavy-tracked equipment is built on. It's incredible.
It really is.
But the name Caterpillar, that's a story of pure branding genius, and it didn't come from an engineer. It came from a photographer.
Yeah, it's one of the great corporate naming anecdotes. Charles Clements, the company photographer, was apparently viewing the moving machine.
Okay.
And it's possible he was looking through the ground glass of his camera, which would have inverted the image. And he commented to Holt that the tracks moving over the carrier rollers, lifting and laying themselves down,
Looked like a caterpillar.
looked exactly like a fuzzy caterpillar crawling along. And Holt, recognizing the perfect description, he trademarked the name Caterpillar in 1910. It just perfectly captured the motion.
It's a fantastic, sticky piece of branding.
Yeah.
Now, while Holt was innovating in California, we do have to note that this idea, the Trek vehicle, wasn't exclusively American, was it?
That's a crucial historical footnote. At the same time, over in Grantham, England, a firm called Richard Hornsby & Sons was also working on steel-plated tracked vehicles.
And they patented their version in 1904, the same year?
The very same year as the Holt breakthrough. And what's fascinating about the Hornsby design is that it was, arguably more advanced in one key respect.
Which was?
It was the first to steer using differential braking of the tracks. It completely eliminated the steering wheel and the old forward tiller.
Differential braking. So that's applying power or resistance to one track to turn the machine, which is still how modern tracked vehicles operate.
Exactly. Hornsby found a pretty limited market for the design, but Holt immediately recognized the superior steering mechanism.
Right.
And showing some real strategic foresight, Holt bought the Hornsby patent just a few years later. He consolidated all the best available intellectual property for the track system under one roof.
So with the technology locked down, the company was really poised for success in agriculture. But it was World War I that completely changed their trajectory, shifting them from farm equipment to, military hardware.
WWI was the single biggest catalyst for the company's transformation, no question. Even before the United States formally entered the conflict, Holt was shipping its massive track-type tractors to the Allied powers.
To the UK, France, Russia.
And while they were initially intended for large-scale agricultural use, the military immediately saw the true potential on the battlefront.
I mean, trying to traverse the hellscape of the Western Front required exactly this kind of low-ground pressure machine.
Absolutely. The muddy, shell-scarred terrain riddled with trenches. It was completely impassable for wheeled vehicles. The Holt tractor was deployed to haul heavy artillery, specifically things like the 6-inch and 9.2-inch howitzers.
So the track system allowed them to position those massive guns wherever they were needed most.
Regardless of the terrain. It was a game changer for logistics.
Well, the influence goes deeper than just a supply contract, right? The Holt tractor literally inspired the weapon that defined modern land warfare.
The tank.
The tank.
It did. The key figure here is a guy named Major Ernest Swinton. He was a British Army war correspondent and a military planner.
And he saw the Holt tractor in action.
He saw it operating in France, and he immediately grasped its potential for an armored, self-propelled fighting vehicle. He championed the idea relentlessly, and that led to the development of the first British tanks.
So even though another company built the first actual tanks...
Right. A competing English firm, William Foster & Co., ultimately built the first ones. But Swinton's advocacy and the operational success of the Holt tractor in the trenches, that cemented its role as the conceptual father of the tank.
It profoundly and permanently altered ground warfare tactics.
It did. That simple agricultural invention became the defining characteristic of the 20th century battlefield.
That legacy of being the father of the tank carried a lot of weight, but the end of WWI brought the Holt company right to the edge of ruin. That reliance on military contracts led to an almost immediate post-war collapse.
It was the classic boom-bust scenario, just on a grand scale. Holt's production lines had expanded so aggressively to meet military demand.
And then the war ends and they're just shut down.
Suddenly shut down, they had all this expanded capacity and now zero demand for heavy-duty military tractors. And to make it worse, many of the tractors they shipped to Europe were returned after the war.
So they flooded the U.S. market with used equipment.
And that depressed prices for Holt's brand new inventory. They had to borrow massive amounts of capital just to keep the lights on.
And all this time, their rival, C.L. Best, was strategically positioned to capitalize on Holt's weakness. This is what sets up this forced strategic merger.
C.L. Best Tractor Company, founded by Clarence Leo Best, had played a smarter game, or at least a luckier one during the war.
They focused on smaller tractors.
They did. They had government contracts, but they specialized in smaller, more agile agricultural tractors, the kind peacetime farmers actually needed. So by 1920, when Benjamin Holt died, his company was struggling with debt, while Best had a significant market lead in that smaller, high-demand segment.
So the ultimate solution wasn't driven by some shared vision. It was financial exhaustion.
Pure necessity.
Yeah.
And it was driven by the bankers who were funding their debt. A guy named Harry H. Fair, a key financier, he stepped in. He was already financing Best, and he recognized that the only way to save the core technology and end the ruinous debt was to combine the two rivals.
And they were spending an insane amount on legal fees, right?
The cost of the rivalry is just astonishing. Between 1907 and 1918, Holt and Best had spent approximately $1.5 million, a staggering sum for that era, just fighting each other over patents and trademarks.
So the merger, which was finalized in 1925 to form the Caterpillar Tractor Company, it basically paid for itself by just eliminating the legal department's budget.
In a sense, yes. It was the most expensive peace treaty in the history of the tractor business.
And C.L. Best took over.
Crucially, yes. Yeah. C.L. Best assumed the CEO position, and he held it all the way until 1951. And there was an immediate strategic shift under his leadership.
What did they do?
They immediately rationalized the product lines, dropping several high-cost, older Holt designs, and they successfully transitioned the entire product portfolio to diesel engines.
Which were far more efficient.
Way more efficient and more powerful than the old gasoline models. It was a huge leap forward.
And that strategic pivot focusing on road building, that was key to their long-term survival, especially given the financial climate of the time.
It was pure, deliberate, strategic timing. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1921 had kicked off this billion-dollar federal highway building program,
which created a massive, sustained demand for earth-moving equipment.
And Caterpillar positioned itself perfectly to supply the machinery for this nationwide infrastructure boom. This allowed them to not only survive, but to actually grow right through the economic devastation of the Great Depression in the 1930s.
Infrastructure spending literally saved the company.
It did.
So moving forward to the post-WWII era, that focus on infrastructure propelled Caterpillar from just a successful American manufacturer into a true multinational corporation.
That transition really starts around 1950. And their global expansion has always been closely tied to geopolitical shifts and, emerging market demands.
A really compelling example is their foray into Russia.
It is. They opened the Tosno facility near St. Petersburg in 1999. And this wasn't just another factory, it was a huge political and economic statement. The facility included the first electrical substation built in the entire Leningrad Oblast since the dissolution of the Soviet government in 1991.
That is a remarkable statistic. It shows how deeply embedded Caterpillar was in the redevelopment of these global economies.
Absolutely. But, as quickly as strategic interests develop, they can vanish.
Right.
Following the geopolitical events of 2022, Caterpillar ceased production at Tosno, and by late 2023, they sold off all the assets to a Russian company. That rapid, 24-year turnaround just shows the volatility of maintaining a truly global footprint.
That shifting strategy is also visible in their internal geography. The headquarters shuffle has been relentless recently, especially for a company so historically tied to one place.
The headquarters saga is fascinating because it really suggests a change in corporate identity. For decades, Peoria, Illinois was Caterpillar. They were synonymous.
And then in 2017, they moved to Deerfield, Illinois.
Right. And then most recently, in June 2022, they revealed they would relocate their global headquarters again, this time to Irving, Texas.
Citing strategic interest.
The official statement cited it as being in the best strategic interest of the company, which suggests improved access to global logistics hubs and talent pools. For such a historically rooted industrial giant, that sequence of rapid relocations is highly telling.
So let's look at what that Irving, Texas-run global operation actually does today. It breaks down into 4 segments.
4 main ones. You've got construction industries, resource industries, energy and transportation, and financial products.
The construction industry segment, that's the iconic yellow iron, the excavators, graders, pavers, the stuff you see on every highway project.
Right. But the resource industry segment is where the really massive scale lives. That deals with mining, quarrying, heavy earth-moving equipment.
So between those two, Caterpillar is the world's largest manufacturer of this kind of equipment.
They are, offering around 400 different products.
And how complex is the manufacturing for just one of those, say, a wheel loader?
It really demonstrates their globally optimized, highly specific manufacturing footprint. For example, Caterpillar is the world's largest manufacturer of wheel loaders. But they don't build them all in one place. The small-size loaders are designed and made in Clayton, North Carolina. The medium and large sizes are designed in Aurora, Illinois.
But the manufacturing is split up.
It's very complex. Only the large wheel loaders are manufactured exclusively in the U.S. on 3 separate assembly lines in Aurora. Meanwhile, the medium ones are manufactured in the U.S., Japan, Brazil, India, and China.
Which ensures localized supply chains and reduces the impact of tariffs and logistics costs.
Exactly.
So the construction and resource machines are the visible products, but the energy and transportation division is kind of the quiet giant that powers virtually everything else the company makes and a lot of the world's logistics system.
That's the key structural point. E&T is the spine of the company. Their engine manufacturing business is critical.
They make diesel and natural gas engines, gas turbines.
Right, used in their own machines, yes, but also as prime movers in railroad locomotives, semi-trucks, massive marine vessels, and ships.
And they also provide power for critical infrastructure like emergency generators.
For data centers, hospitals, and even peak load power plants for utilities, it's a huge business.
And that depth in the engine market wasn't all grown organically, was it? They bought a lot of that expertise.
Oh, absolutely. The growth relied heavily on strategic buying. They acquired a company called Perkins Engines in 1998, which gave them specialized expertise in small to mid-sized diesel engines.
And then MWM in 2010.
Right. In 2010, they bought MWM GmbH, which strengthened their portfolio in gas and diesel-powered generator sets. These acquisitions laid the groundwork for their transition into a full-service power and logistics provider, not just an equipment maker.
And that transition through acquisition, I think that feeds directly into our next segment. How aggressive buying and critically tactical selling really defined the modern Caterpillar portfolio.
Caterpillar's post-war strategy shifted from just manufacturing to strategically acquiring critical specialized market share. They weren't just looking to get bigger. They were looking to diversify into sectors that required massive specialized engines and power systems.
Let's look at how they built their marine and power empire through these targeted purchases.
This really started decades ago. In 1981, they acquired the Solar Division and Turbomac Division from International Harvester.
And that became Solar Turbines.
That formed the foundation of Solar Turbines, incorporated a major player in industrial gas turbines today. Then, in 1997, they bought Krupp-Mack Maschinenbau, which specialized in large, slow-speed marine diesel engines.
So these are the engines that power huge cargo vessels and ships.
All over the world, yes.
But the move that truly expanded their transportation footprint was the big push into railroads. That must have required a huge commitment.
It was a very decisive two-step push for railroad dominance. First, in 2006, they acquired Progress Rail, a major supplier of railroad products and services.
So that was the infrastructure and service component.
Yeah, right. Then in 2010, they completed the massive $2.9 billion acquisition of Electro-Motive Diesel, or EMD.
EMD is a legend in the rail industry. They've been providing locomotives for decades.
EMD is iconic. By acquiring them, Caterpillar instantly positioned itself as a world-leading producer of railroad locomotives and the large diesel engines that power them.
So they just skipped years of internal development.
And immediately became a major player in global logistics.
And their largest acquisition speaks to their long-term bet on global commodity demand. I'm talking about the massive push into mining equipment.
The purchase of Bucyrus International in 2011, that was the single largest acquisition in company history at $8.8 billion.
Wow.
This was a clear, calculated move. It gave Caterpillar immediate leadership in both surface and underground mining equipment, which significantly bolstered their resource industries segment.
So it was a massive bet on the sustained long-term global demand for commodities.
Whether it's iron ore, coal, copper, you name it, they were betting that the world would continue digging, and they wanted to sell all the shovels.
We've talked about the big buys, but Sometimes even a multi-billion-dollar company makes a strategic bet that just doesn't pan out. Let's talk about the rapid exit from the tunnel boring machine business.
This really shows Caterpillar's ruthless portfolio management. In 2008, they acquired Lovett Inc., a manufacturer of these sophisticated tunnel boring machines, or TBMs.
Thinking it would be a strategic entry into a rapidly expanding market.
Right, the global tunneling market was booming. But only 5 years later, in May 2013, leadership announced that the tunneling business no longer fits that strategy.
And they just got out.
They ceased production and exited the business completely by mid-2014. That quick 5-year turnaround just shows they prioritize strategic fit and profitability over simply holding on to new ventures.
What's equally surprising, I think, is their complete exit from their original market, agriculture. They literally started by solving a farming problem, and yet today they no longer manufacture farm equipment.
The irony is profound, isn't it? They had a decent run trying to make the Challenger range of agricultural tractors starting in the 1970s.
And those used their continuous track system.
Right, which they trademarked as the Moby Track system. They even had temporary joint ventures like marketing-class built Lexion combines in the U.S.
But 2002 was the final curtain call for Caterpillar's direct involvement in ag manufacturing.
Correct. In 2002, they made a clean break. They sold the entire Challenger tractor business to AGCO.
But critically, they didn't just sell the assets.
No, they licensed the use of the Challenger name, the CET name, and the iconic yellow livery to AGCO. This pivot marked the end of their direct manufacturing venture into farming. They transitioned their agricultural income stream from manufacturing revenue to licensing fees.
And that immediately leads us to the sheer value of that iconic yellow brand. They make a ton of money just by allowing others to use the logo.
Oh, the brand is a massive financial asset. It generates substantial income through licensing. The Caterpillar yellow livery and that 3-letter CAT logo are rigorously controlled trademarks.
And they license the right to manufacture and sell products under that trademark across countless categories.
Exactly. Wolverine Worldwide has been a prominent licensee for their work footwear since 1994. They had Cat phones, which specialized in toughened mobile phones until recently.
You see the brand on everything.
Yes.
Watches, sunglasses, luggage, flashlights.
It's everywhere. But this intense control over the brand has led to some truly bizarre and, frankly, controversial trademark claims against small businesses that seem completely unrelated to heavy equipment.
They face a lot of criticism for this, right? It's often framed as corporate bullying.
It is, because they pursued trademark revocation against businesses simply for using the word cat, even when the possibility of consumer confusion is, almost zero.
The source specifically highlights their actions against Cat and Cloud.
A small cafe in Santa Cruz, California.
Wait, let me stop you there. This is the one I couldn't believe. Are you telling me the world's largest construction company sued a piano-playing feline? They went after the viral sensation keyboard cat?
They absolutely did. They clearly take the sanctity of those 3 letters incredibly seriously.
Regardless of whether the product is a million-pound mining truck or a tuxedo-wearing, keyboard-playing cat on YouTube.
It really underscores their view. The brand is valuable, and they will defend it across every possible industry, even if it generates a ton of negative publicity.
We've traced the history and established the enormous global scale of Caterpillar. But the company's trajectory has been constantly shaped by intense conflict with its workforce, with regulators, and with ethical monitors. Let's start with that near-death experience of the 1980s, which led directly to the famous labor wars.
The 1980s were an existential crisis for Caterpillar. There's no other way to put it. They were hemorrhaging money, at one point losing almost $1 million per day.
And this was a confluence of factors, right? A global downturn, but also fierce competition.
Primarily, the fierce competitive pressure from their Japanese rival, Komatsu.
And Komatsu was not subtle about their intentions.
Not at all. Komatsu famously adopted the internal slogan, "Encircle Caterpillar." They were relentless in undercutting prices and challenging Caterpillar on a global scale.
And then there was the Soviet embargo.
Right. Compounding all of this, the U.S. declared an embargo against the Soviet Union following the invasion of Afghanistan. This left Caterpillar with $400 million worth of specialized pipe-laying machinery that had already been built.
And suddenly they couldn't sell it.
That immediate $400 million loss led directly to massive layoffs and just exacerbated their entire cash flow crisis.
This financial distress led directly to a decades-long, bitter struggle with the United Auto Workers, the UAW. These were defining conflicts that essentially redrew the map of U.S. manufacturing.
They were brutal. The UAW conducted a 5-month strike in 1992. But the most significant one was the 1994 to 1995 strike, which lasted an unprecedented 17 months at the time.
And Caterpillar's response was just as aggressive.
Aggressive and defining. They threatened to permanently replace their entire unionized workforce. They deployed non-bargain-for employees management, engineers, R&D staff into the factories to maintain production.
Suspending critical research and development work just to break the union's leverage.
That's right.
Wait, 17 months is an incredible length of time for a major industrial strike. How did it ultimately resolve? Did the union achieve its goals?
Surprisingly, no. And that's the critical, often overlooked detail. The 17-month strike ended with the UAW deciding to return to work without a contract.
Even as Caterpillar was reporting record profits.
Yes, which suggested they had successfully weathered the storm using temporary labor and management staff. The UAW was holding out for a top wage of $40,000, comparable to what John Deere was paying, but Caterpillar just stood firm on their $39,000 offer.
It was a massive psychological victory for the company.
A huge one. And this experience cemented a massive strategic shift in their manufacturing geography, which became known as the Southern Strategy.
Okay, what was that?
Well, having been crippled by centralized, powerful labor actions in their traditional strongholds in Illinois and Pennsylvania, Caterpillar developed a deliberate corporate strategy to reduce that vulnerability.
So they outsourced.
They outsourced a lot of their warehousing and parts production, and more significantly, they executed this Southern strategy. They opened new, smaller, focus facilities in right-to-work states.
Specifically North Carolina, South Carolina, Mississippi.
Exactly. This decentralized their manufacturing footprint and significantly shifted power away from those traditional organized labor bases.
And they even exported this aggressive strategy internationally, which led to controversy in Canada.
Yes, the 2012 conflict at their locomotive plant in London, Ontario was highly publicized. Caterpillar locked out its workers and then demanded they accept massive pay cuts, in some cases up to 50%.
And their justification.
They claimed this was necessary to compete with the lower labor costs at comparable Caterpillar facilities in the U.S.
This sparked a huge local controversy, didn't it?
It did. It led to a temporary consumer boycott, with major retailers like Mark's Work Warehouse pulling Caterpillar-branded boots from their shelves in protest of the labor tactics.
Moving from labor relations to regulatory oversight, Caterpillar has also faced significant environmental scrutiny, highlighted by a major Clean Air Act violation in the late 1990s.
This was a really serious issue. It involved the widespread use of illegal defeat devices on their diesel engines. In 1999, Caterpillar and 5 other major diesel engine manufacturers signed a consent decree with the Justice Department after government investigations uncovered these violations.
And this involved over 1 million diesel engines.
Over 1 million, yes.
So we need to unpack what a defeat device actually does and why it was such a profound violation.
Okay, so a defeat device is basically a piece of technology, usually software, that's used to regulate and limit emissions only during the specific mandated government presale tests.
So it makes the engines appear compliant with clean air regulations.
Exactly. But once the trucks or equipment were used in normal highway driving, their intended purpose, the devices would automatically disable the emission controls,
Which allow the engines to emit
up to triple the permissible level of smog-forming nitrogen oxides, or NOx.
Triple? Wow.
The government estimated that in 1998 alone, these violating vehicles emitted an additional 1.3 million short tons of NOx. To put that in perspective, that's an amount equivalent to the yearly emissions of 65 million cars.
That is a staggering environmental impact. What was the financial consequence for this failure?
The initial settlement required an $83 million civil penalty. But what's especially notable is the subsequent compliance failure.
What happened?
Well, despite successfully lobbying for extensions, Caterpillar was the only company that signed that consent decree to fail to meet the updated 2002 emissions standards deadline.
And for that persistent failure?
They incurred an additional mandatory $128 million in per-engine nonconformance penalties. It was a very costly failure of both regulation and execution.
However, to ensure a balanced perspective here, the company has also been recognized for some major positive environmental shifts.
They absolutely have. Caterpillar divisions have earned the Illinois Governor's Pollution Prevention Awards consistently since 1997.
There's a great example from their Joliet facility.
There is. They replaced an old chroming process with a flame-sprayed coating for truck suspension systems. This one change alone reduced the generation of hazardous waste by 700,000 pounds annually and conserved 14 million gallons of water.
And they do maintain a presence on indices like the Dow Jones Sustainability World Index.
Which indicates this dual and sometimes conflicting commitment to environmental responsibility.
All right, let's move to the financial controversies, specifically that high-profile federal raid over major tax avoidance claims. This involves some really elaborate international maneuvering.
This all came to a head in March 2017 with a federal raid on Caterpillar's Peoria headquarters, but the investigation really began much earlier. In 2014, a Senate subcommittee investigation focused on massive changes in Caterpillar's offshore tax strategy.
And this centered on a Swiss subsidiary, Caterpillar Sarl, or CRRL.
Located in Geneva, yes.
So the core allegation was that they were funneling profits from the U.S. parts business to this Swiss subsidiary to lower their effective tax rate. How did that complex financial mechanism actually work?
It utilized a technique called transfer pricing. The company was allegedly selling its replacement parts inventory to its own subsidiary, CRRL, at an artificially low price in the U.S.
Okay.
CRRL, which benefited from much lower Swiss corporate tax rates, would then turn around and sell those parts back to the global dealer network at a much higher price.
So by doing this, the U.S. company only booked a small, low-margin profit.
While the vast majority of the high-margin profit was booked in Switzerland, where the tax bill was significantly lower, the IRS claimed the firm was liable for $1 billion in unpaid taxes just for the years 2007 to 2009.
$1 billion. And the investigation also exposed some internal communications that painted a very questionable picture of the intent behind this whole scheme.
They were certainly incriminating. The Senate investigation uncovered documents from PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, who were acting in the highly problematic dual role of Caterpillar's global tax consultant and controller.
And these internal PwC documents.
They suggested that the elaborate move was clearly designed to evade U.S. taxes. One PwC document stated, quote, "We are going to have to do some dancing." And another, perhaps more cavalierly, noted, "What the heck, we will all be retired when this comes up on audit."
Wait, so the internal documents show this blatant intent, but what was the ultimate resolution of that multi-billion-dollar dispute? It sounds like a massive victory for Caterpillar, despite the weight of the evidence.
It was resolved in January 2023. Caterpillar reached a settlement with the IRS that resolved the entire tax dispute spanning from 2007 to 2016 regarding the CSRL profits.
And crucially,
the company stated that it was not ordered to pay any penalties or fines as part of that settlement. The company characterized the resolution as mutually agreeable, finally putting that decade-long controversy to rest.
Finally, we have to address the intense scrutiny surrounding Caterpillar's military sales and the profound and very sensitive human rights implications tied to their iconic equipment.
This is perhaps the most difficult and the longest-running ethical controversy the company faces. Human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, have long criticized Caterpillar for the sale of specific, highly modified D9 bulldozers to the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF.
And for their use in the occupied Palestinian territories.
That's correct.
These critiques are rooted in the specific use cases of the equipment, right?
That's right. The D9 bulldozers, these are massive, heavily armored machines capable of moving huge amounts of earth. They have been systematically used for controversial actions, including the destruction of Palestinian houses and the demolition of farms.
And critics argue that by selling and servicing this equipment, Caterpillar is complicit in actions that violate international law.
The Office of the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights even sent the company a warning letter about this way back in 2004 about the risk of complicity.
The controversy then tragically became centered on the 2003 death of the American activist Rachel Corrie.
The incident in Rafah remains infamous. Rachel Corrie was killed by an Israeli soldier who was driving a D9 bulldozer during a protest against house demolitions.
And a subsequent lawsuit filed by her family against Caterpillar was ultimately unsuccessful.
That's right. An Israeli court later ruled that her death was an accident, and they cited the severely restricted field of view from the heavily armored operator's cabin of the D9.
These ethical concerns are increasingly translating into concrete financial consequences, though, especially from large institutional investors.
We have seen a very clear trend toward divestment based purely on these concerns. As early as 2014, the Presbyterian Church, USA, sold off its shares in Caterpillar, explicitly citing the use of the bulldozers in house demolitions.
And more recently,
in August 2024, San Francisco State University announced its decision to divest. And perhaps the most impactful action came from the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, one of the world's largest. They announced in August 2025 that it was divesting its massive $2.4 billion stake in Caterpillar.
And the Norwegian fund's reasoning was incredibly pointed.
It was explicit and highly critical. They stated they found, quote, no doubt that Caterpillar's products are being used to commit extensive and systematic violations of international humanitarian law.
And they criticized the company for failing to implement any measures to prevent this kind of end use.
Any measures whatsoever. It's a powerful illustration that ethical scrutiny is now a major factor in institutional investment risk analysis.
What an incredible journey we've taken. I mean, from a 40-horsepower steam tractor sinking into a muddy California swamp, we've traced the development of a company that became a $64 billion corporation that is now simultaneously navigating international finance, aggressive labor strategy, and these deeply complex human rights concerns.
And it all started with that one single innovation, the continuous track system. It led to dominance, and it fueled everything from WWI artillery hauling to massive modern global mining operations.
The complexity is really profound, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Caterpillar's strategy has been brilliantly aggressive, buying major expertise in engines, rail, and mining, using corporate maneuvers to achieve maximum profitability. But that success has always come with immense scrutiny.
Whether it's that intense, years-long pushback from the UAW that literally changed U.S. manufacturing geography,
or the 7-year battle with the IRS over massive tax evasion claims that, at the end of the day, resolved without penalty.
The story of Caterpillar really demonstrates that being the global market leader in heavy machinery isn't just about engineering efficiency anymore. It's not just about solving problems of gravity and friction for humanity.
Right.
The irony is that the biggest problems it faces today, labor disputes, tax claims, ethical divestment, are purely human and political. And these are problems that no amount of steel or horsepower can solve.
And that leads to a fascinating closing thought. If the name Caterpillar originated from that simple observed visual of a tracked machine moving like an insect, what metaphor will capture the next 100 years of a corporation that is now as adept at high-stakes global politics and finance as it is at moving Earth? It mastered the physical world. The question now is whether it can master the ethical and political one.
What is the Caterpillar of the digital age? A company defined not by moving Earth, but by navigating the moral landscape.
It's a good question.
Something to mull over as you see those powerful yellow machines next time you're on the road. Thank you for diving deep with us.